This is the BallBusiness Podcast, where we'll be catching exciting and insightful stories about the world of football agency. Try as much as possible to like, subscribe, and follow us on all our social media pages. My name is Fumbi Ball, and I would like you to catch up with us. I'm always starstruck whenever I see you, and I'm being honest about it.
Why?
Because it's the truth. Because for me, starting this thing, I've done a lot of research. Is it what I want to do after law school? Do I want to go into, investment law, music, and all of those things? And I tend to stick to football, and I've been looking at, okay, these are the people I could reach out to, and I used to see SISU Sports and stuff. So I was like, ooh, yeah, maybe one day. So, and thank God. So for me, since then, and it's just like the stars aligning to say, okay, yeah, you are doing the right thing, you are doing what you're supposed to do. So for me, it's always a privilege to even reach out, to speak to you, to send you a text message on WhatsApp. And yeah, so thank you so much all the time. I don't know, I'm sure you'll be like, Fumbi, stop saying thank you, but
I'll just say,
I can't
look,
help it.
yeah, just do your thing. Like you say,
Yeah.
everyone's human, right? I know
Yeah.
that people like to put themselves in pedestals or, have different kind of power dynamics. Fundamentally, particularly in the modern world, I think it's about what you can bring value-wise, and just connecting with people. Because particularly football, any sport, it is actually a people business. Like, you're working with, on our side, we're working with players, we're working with coaches, we're talking with clubs. It's all about human interaction. So I always say, get that human element right, because that's really the thing that's going to help to drive your career and your business. And don't be one of those people who hide behind emails all the time, don't want to show their face, always looking for excuses not to have to actually have that interaction.
Yeah, thank you for that advice.
Yeah.
I'll keep that up there. Today we are in London. Good afternoon, and welcome to the BallBusiness Podcast.
Afternoon.
This is the super agent.
So you're embarrassing yourself now, as well as embarrassing me.
Yeah, super agent Lindi Ngwenya, if that's correct, because a lot of people don't get it right. She's the CEO of SISU Sports. I won't want to use the word wanted everywhere, but she's most sought after, not only in Africa, but in the US, in Asia. Yes, welcome, and thank you for coming again.
Yeah, nice to see you again, Fumbi. It was, a couple of months ago now, we were in Nigeria together, right?
Yeah, February.
Yeah, good. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Lindy. So, for those that doesn't know who Lindy is, for a bit of introduction, can you just tell us about yourself? And
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, where shall I start? Let me start from the beginning, so to speak. So I was born and brought up in London. Long time ago now, probably too long for me to care to say. My parents were from Zimbabwe, so they came over a long time ago. I was born here, brought up in London, went to school here, and I was very much growing up sports mad. I'm a Tottenham Hotspurs fan. I was a Tottenham Hotspur fan in the days when we actually won stuff in the 80s, so you can probably get a little bit of an idea in terms of the age. And so, for my sins, that's my club, and I have to live with it, even though the other team in North London seemed to be in the ascendancy. And growing up, as a girl who was really into sport and into football, opportunities were limited to genuinely play the game. And that's something that stuck with me. But luckily, as I got to sort of university age, the world started to change a little bit. And I was able to really start to actively lean into participating in sports rather than just being a spectator. I think, as you know, though, if you try and take up football from the age of 18, it's not going to happen.
No, it's not.
But I found a home in rugby. It's a sport where, what I love about it, you can, any shape or size, you can do it. And pretty much if you've got a basic ability to run and tackle people, then you can play it at quite a high level, even when you pick it up late. So I played rugby at university, really got the bug that I wanted to work in sport. When I left university, I went into the army because, if you're going to try and combine sport, particularly back then, and again, as a woman where there wasn't really any professional structures around any sport, the only ways you can really do it was probably become a PE teacher or go into the military.
Yeah.
I know from a very early stage I'd never make a great teacher. So I went down the military route. So at the end of uni, I went to Sandhurst for a year, did my commissioning course as an officer, and commissioned as an officer into Royal Engineers. And at the same time, I was able to combine that with playing rugby for Blackheath. Did that for about 5 years. Before then, I subsequently left the army, went into the city, I ended up being a credit trader in the city for a number of banks. Continued playing rugby over that period, and I mean, it was a gradual kind of process. But essentially, I knew I always wanted to be working in sport. For me, the sports business side of things was the area that I wanted to work in. And I did realise over the time of my army experience and then working in finance that being an agent particularly would be, I think, the right skill set for me. I think I'm relatively good around working with people, around mentoring people, helping to shape young people. But at the same time, I've definitely got a business overlay to that. So after 12 years in the finance business, I decided it was time to really follow my passion, so to speak. And I established SISU Sports Management in 2013. And from the outset, our sort of mission has always been to work with talent from what we consider to be underserved markets. And if you cast your mind back to 2013, I mean, women's football was one of the first areas that I looked to work in. Having played rugby as a female, I really felt that I had at least a good understanding of some of the challenges of being a female in sport. So women's football was a natural area for us to really have a focus on. As well as women's football, like I said, I've got African background, Zimbabwean mainly. I could see back in 2013 that African football had many, many challenges, but so many opportunities. We always talk about the talent there is across the continent of Africa, how untapped it is, how many talents fall by the wayside, how many infrastructure challenges there are around the football ecosystem. So again, naturally, I wanted to lean into Africa and African football, and that's again been one of the pillars of our business from the outset. And then the third bit was around, I guess, developing that business model of, okay, we're working with women's football, we're working with African football, male, female, and sort of the ecosystem there. How are we going to pull that together into a viable business model? And the football is a global business when it comes to talent management and transfers. So it's about understanding how we could create a pathway, I guess, a system within the agency to be able to create opportunities for the talent, and clearly then at some point be able to kind of monetize that. So our first go-to market was Sweden. Wow. And the reason we chose Sweden as a go-to market is my elder brother was, he was kind of let's be fair, he was kind of a failed footballer. He can't quite manage to get his pro contract. He'd moved to Sweden, and by the time I started CC in 2013, he'd been there for about 15, 20 years, working in football as a coach with that network. And Sweden was a great market when we did a little bit of research as a first go-to market, because you had a women's league in 2013, which most countries around the world, even in Europe, didn't have. And also you had a men's league there, which was very receptive to non-European talent. So as we were working with a lot of African players, then clearly, we needed to have a market where we had a lot of options to place the players. So 2013, women's football, African football, Sweden as a go-to market to kind of create that sort of pathway, and then the business model. Fast forward to 2025, we've really benefited from a few things. So first of all, women's football, looking back on it now, that was probably the beginning of the growth path of women's football. So we've been really able to, benefit from the growth of the women's game and being there from the ground level. So as a women's football business side of things, we've kind of developed into a global agency. Our network goes across all the major leagues, whether they be, like you mentioned, Asia Pacific, so like Australia, Japan, Europe. Obviously across Europe we have many players, and then we've got our America's office in Charlotte, and we've got players across America and also in South America. And then on the men's football side of life, we basically again have continued that theme of focusing on that African talent and looking to place them, and we've placed players into the Scandinavian markets, Sweden I've mentioned already, Finland, Denmark, and we've added in recently in the last couple of years Australia in particular on the men's talent side, because with a few kind of changes with regards to work permits and regulations here in England, there is more of a door now to move talent from the Australian League, New Zealand League into England and some of the bigger markets over here in football. So look, lots happening, pretty long, long kind of rambly sort of journey through the agency's business. But I guess the way to summarize where we are now is we've built out the talent business to kind of have a global footprint, to have a really strong focus on particular markets. And now we're looking for the future to really create that 360 agency. So we've got a commercial arm that we brought into the business over the last sort of year. And we're also adding in the sort of player care stuff in a much more beefed up way over the next few months. So yeah, we want to be in 5 years' time kind of one of the main agencies for like young emerging talent across Africa and Asia.
Well, that's a very lovely bit of history.
Yeah.
I think, if I'm correct, that's 12, 13 years now.
12 years.
12 years
yeah.
of being in the game. And yeah, I know 5, 10 minutes, 1 hour is not going to do justice to see the amount of work, the amount of resilience you've put into it. You know, starting with that kind of background, finance is very good background to come from if you are going into the world of football, because the whole money and, you know, even human resource that goes into both side of the business. Yeah. So what challenge do you face, you know, coming from that side and getting into football? Because there are a lot of gatekeepers, like people do say. How did you even come there? Yeah, you're from England. You're born and brought up in this place. You know, you are familiar with the environment. But going into football as it were then, back then, and being a female agent, what challenge did you face?
I think, look, I think football, and like a lot of sport, it's so much about networks. And if you distill that down, it's about relationships. So it hasn't been an overnight thing. Like I said, I've been in the business for 12 years. 12 years. It's about developing relationships. It's about, you know, you've got to go put yourself out there. You know, you've got to go to the places where you want to meet, whether it's meet with players at games, meet with clubs, whether it's conferences, all other ways you can put yourself out there. But then when you then put yourself out there and make those connections, you need to demonstrate a level of competence to develop that trust that then they'll be able to open the door to you eventually. And you're right, football's not a business where people tend to open the door to you straight away, particularly if you're not an ex-player, you know, you haven't come from that football family. So there's a certain amount of persistence, consistency in the way you conduct yourself. Do what you say you're going to do. Try and be very, very clear and honest in your communication. And over time, I'm not saying you're going to convert everyone, because some people are never there to change or be converted. But over time, you'll build up enough of a network that you'll really start to gradually increase and get more momentum.
Oh, great. Talking about network, you know, what's the best way to go about that? You've mentioned going to conferences. For me, I remember, you know, reaching out to you on LinkedIn. I always tell the story to everyone who wants to hear that. Reaching out on LinkedIn, and I was lucky to get a response from you, because for you, I've interacted with you. I see you've got that mindset of sending the elevator back to the ground floor. A lot of people don't get responses or reply. So what's the best way for new and emerging agents or young agents into the business about network?
Yeah, look, you make a really good point about LinkedIn, and I'll talk about LinkedIn in a second. So, I mean, I've already touched upon you need to get your boots on the ground. Yeah. I think in this modern age, a lot of people try and hide behind the keyboard. But what you really want to do is have a mix of, you know, outreach, whether it be email, LinkedIn, even Instagram sometimes can be quite effective, depending on what sort of audience you're trying to reach, as well as getting your face out there. If you're young, you've got the chance to maybe do some voluntary stuff or interning. That's a good way to get at least your foot on the ladder, so to speak. If you're like me, where you're coming from a role, right, where you've got a little bit more of experience, you're a bit more senior, you don't really want to be tramping around in a high-vis vest, being a volunteer at an event, let's be honest about it. I think, you need to lean in quite a lot into existing contacts that you may have and join the dots. You know, I remember when I started, there was a few people that I used to work with in finance who I found out that, you know, their cousin, for instance, worked in football, or, a friend of a friend. So look into your own network that you have if you're looking to transition into sport from another career. see within your network who you can sort of tap into to then give you connections, get yourself out on the ground, and then the LinkedIn piece and the sort of digital piece. I think LinkedIn is a great tool, right? For me, it's worked really well in terms of outreach, identifying key decision makers. And again, like anything, once you've made that connection, you have to make the right approach. And in terms of what you said, like when you connected with me on LinkedIn, you made an introduction, you said who you were, you gave a little bit of a suggestion of a value exchange. Yeah. I don't actually reply to a lot of LinkedIn messages because a lot of LinkedIn messages I receive are essentially, hi, I'm so and so, help me. I'm sorry, but that to me doesn't, I'm not going to sort of respond to kind of a sob story or a pity note.
Yeah.
Who are you? Why are you reaching out to me? Like, let's, give me an idea of what value exchange there might be. I don't mean a transactional way. I mean, even as a student, you're coming from, a recent course where you probably got some real kind of cutting edge or up-to-date information on the sports industry. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Let me know why it's worth giving you that answer.
Yeah.
I don't want someone just to say hi there. I just don't answer those because it's just draining.
Yeah. I remember even sending down my CV. Yeah. I've got this feedback about saying, okay, even maybe when you go to networking events, I've seen a lot of young agents like myself go in there and say, oh, fake it till you make it. Try and elevate what you can do for people. What's your perspective on that?
Look, I mean, everyone can do what they do, right? As in, you be you.
Yeah.
But what's worked for me is being very, very clear, I guess, about what I can do and always do my utmost to deliver on what I can do. Yeah. And what I really, really have shied away from is trying to make promises that I'm not really confident, I really don't think I can keep. So I do understand that you have to be confident. You have to at least give the air that, you believe in what you're doing, because players need to work with agents who have confidence and who have the ability to make things happen. That is true. But I think you don't want to ever err into the side where you're just making stuff up. And I'm sorry to say it, but I have come across a lot of merchants who it becomes very clear that they're just making stuff up. They're making up club relationships. They're making up stuff about their own kind of experience. I've come across agents who've never even done a deal, and yet they're like putting out content like they're some sort of agent's guru. So that sort of stuff, I think you'll get found out. And again, in a small world like football, once you get found out, I think it's very hard then to continue doing the business.
Because trust is a very, very valuable commodity in this business, like I've seen.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
So what you talked about doing the deal now, because there are a lot of people 2 years in the business, they've not done a deal.
Yeah.
And some of them, they don't even have a player, signed into their agency. So I understand networking is good and all of those things. Now for probably you've got the player, how do you get them out there? How do you take that player over the line, the deal? How do you put pen to paper? What strategy do you think would work best?
Yeah, and look, I think taking it back to that example of that player, that agent who's been in the business a couple of years, and they haven't done a deal, or maybe they haven't even got a player yet.
Yeah.
You've got to first of all ask yourself, like, and you probably should have asked yourself this when you were beginning that agent journey, as to what's your business model? So you want to manage players, right? So where are you going to get your players from? How are you going to sign your players? What's your offering? What have you got to offer the player that makes you someone that they would want to sign with? And then subsequently, those players, like, what markets would they work in? How are you going to make the approach? So I'm taking it back a step, because I think if you've answered those questions at the beginning with regards to the players that you want to acquire, I think it makes it a lot easier around how then you market the player. So to give an example, we've said from the outset that we were going to work with women's players, also with African players. Let's take the example of the African players we work with. Well, we're an agency that's primarily based in a number of end markets. So here in the UK, vis-a-vis Europe, also over in the States, where they're also signing African talent increasingly. So the question we ask ourselves is, what are our end markets looking for in terms of player profiles with regards to African players? Well, if you look at a lot of your teams across Europe, they really want to sign young African. This is talking about the male players. They want to sign male players, young players. Generally speaking, they're looking at players from the ages of even as young as 14, 15 to monitor. And when they turn 18, or as soon as they turn 18, if the players have the right kind of attributes and talent, that's when they want to look to bring them in to those European teams. So, you know, taking it back to then, what players are we going to look for in Africa and what players are we scouting? We're going to be looking to work and scout those young players. You know, I see a lot of people sort of go in a little bit blind and, you know, they'll pile into, maybe use an example, the Nigerian league. Young agent piles into Nigerian league, signs a bunch of 30-year-old Nigerian Premier League players and starts to try to pitch them into European clubs that have zero interest in that player profile. So it's just understand what markets you're working in, understand what they need, and then that will really help to guide the right players that you're going to try to bring into the business.
You see, to buttress this point you've just made, for the records, I'm still pretty much a young agent. So I went in not blindly. I had a business plan and all of those things for the ball business. But just to buttress your point, I was speaking to, you know, because I did my master's with the FBA, a lot of top people, sporting directors, even alumni. So I'm lucky to be in that WhatsApp group with a lot of great guys from Man City and all of those big clubs. So I was speaking to one of our alumni, you know. He's the sporting director of a club in Portugal. So I don't want to mention the name of the club. And he said, okay, don't worry, Fumbi, I'll set you up with a call with, he's the managing director. So he's going to set me up with the sporting director, and that's the guy that handles the football business. Okay, Fumbi, don't worry. I'm going to do this, papa. So he did that, sent me the WhatsApp, made an introduction for me. It was easy because it's from his boss, then I'm speaking to him. So I told him, I've got this couple of players, and said, calm down, please. Cool, Emmanuel, you know. I need 17 years old boys, 16, 17. Lindi, I don't have those kind of boys. Because I was thinking, like what you said, 30 years old. So for me, they were not up to 30, but, you know, like 23, 18, thinking, okay, they'll just go into the game. But that's not what the market is asking for. And now now I have to go back and do my assignment and said, okay, don't worry, just give me a couple of time. Let me find the sort of profile for you. So now that brings me back to young agents. How important is learning the works, you know, before going into it, having a business plan? A lot of people don't know this. So what's the best way? I know internship has it. Is there a place where we can learn all of those things and people just not rushing into the business?
Look, I think, I mean, internship, like you say, those places are limited. But the wonders of the world of the internet is actually a lot of that information is there. What you need to do is do your research and really understand, like, the football business. Understand how the football business works. Like, there is so much great content out there about how the football business works. You use the example of Portugal. There's lots of stuff you can read about how Portuguese football works, what their, you know, what the sort of profile is, what the player flows are. You know, they've got obviously a lot of South American players, particularly Brazilian players with the Portuguese language. But if you actually look at clubs, you can garner a lot of information around the what sort of their recruitment style is as well. So, like, I've noticed with a lot of youngish agents, and again, I don't want to sound like this, like, old hand, like, just putting down young agents. I notice a lot of people have not got basic knowledge of football. So, specific example of that is England. England has regulations around who can play in the league. You know, we have a GB point system. Back before that, we used to have a work permit system, and essentially it was based on the level of the player, if they played in the national teams, etc., what leagues they played in. I still see people offering me players like, you know, I had someone the other day offer me a Zimbabwean national team player who's currently playing in Zimbabwe. Look, I understand why they would want to offer me a Zimbabwean. I'm a Zimbabwean. I come from a Zimbabwean family. Well, I understand that. But you need to understand that this player is never, ever going to be suitable for England. The player can't get the points. There's no way that player can move to England. So if you're offering me that sort of player, that's telling me that you don't have basic knowledge around the market that you're offering a player into. Why? You need to understand the market. So I'll hammer that home. Do your research, learn about the markets. If you're being given a request for Bulgaria, as an example, do a bit of research in the Bulgarian market. What are there any limits on foreign players? Does there tend to be a profile? And another thing is, if I get a club request from a country I'm not familiar with, what I'll tend to do is I'll look at the league, like the top league. I'll look at the players in the squads and see if there's any trends around. Does it seem to be a league where it's older players? So you got a lot of leagues where they just really have older players, 23 to 30 plus. They don't really clearly look to bring in young players. What's the nationality trends around there? Is it a league where it's mainly, I'll give you an example, like an Eastern European league. It's a lot of European players. Are there no real non-European players? So does that mean there's some EU type restrictions on the squads? Yeah. Just these things that give me clues. And then if I'm talking to an agent who's giving me the club request, I'll ask those specific questions. Like, are there restrictions on the number of foreign players in the squad? I see there's a lot of only really European players in these squads. Is there real restrictions on non-European players? Do some research before you just picking out players out of your pocket and just throwing them, punting them around like baked goods, like I say.
Yeah, pushing them down someone's throat.
Yeah.
Talking about, learning so much about the market. I remember back then in Nigeria in February when we were speaking, you opened my eyes to the American markets, giving me those stats and telling me, this, that, number of spectators watching the female football. Wow, I was blown away, and it's like, you need to come and, tell people about this, Lindi. So looking at that market, can you give us, how did you get into the American market? And to the extent of you having an office in Charlotte, like you said now, how is it? Because it's difficult to go into soccer, like they call it in the US market. How did you get in there?
Yeah, I won't call it soccer. That's blasphemy, right? Let's just call it football. Well, actually, very early on in the business. So, like I said, I started SISU in 2013. In 2014, I ended up partnering up with an American-based agent. He's a guy called David Williamson. He's been in the business, I think, since the 80s. Like, really kind of established guy. And it was just on one player. It was a player of his that wanted to move from the US to Europe, and I helped him with that. And over the course then of those years, by working in partnership with David's business in America, I got to learn more about the MLS and obviously more about the NWSL, learn about the real specifics of US-based football. Yeah. Things like the draft. They have some real differences versus kind of a lot of European football. There's no promotion and relegation, all of these things. So I guess myself and David, had kind of worked in partnership for 10 years by 2024. And then David was looking to take a little bit of a step back from the day-to-day of agency business. So this was perfect because from our perspective at SISU, we were actually then looking at, we'd opened our Asia Pacific office back in 2023. So now we were looking, we really need to have a presence over in North America. And so that timed perfectly with David looking to take a step back. So what we effectively did was rolled in some of his legacy business and launched the SISU Americas business at the back end of 2024. The guy heading it or driving it, Leo Tillmont, he's someone who's worked with David on the commercial side already for about 7 or 8 years. So it was just everything fell into place perfectly. So Leo is based in Charlotte. He really heads up the SISU Americas business. David is still in the business in an advisory capacity. We've had a really smooth transition of some really great players into our books. We've got like Kerry Bello. She's plays for Orlando Pride, who won the league last year. Brant Bronico, he plays for Charlotte in the MLS. And again, he's a real kind of fan favourite, a local guy who plays for the MLS team. So we've had a really good transition into that America's business. And now the next sort of few years is around sort of building that business into a really significant business on the men's and the women's side.
Wow. All I can see is we've got credible, really good aunts, experienced aunts in partnerships. So how is that important because I know obviously there's no person that can do things on their own, like no success standalone. That's what a lot of people say, which is, for me, I tend to believe that as well. How important is having credible hands, running this business with you?
Look, it's so important having the right people in the business, and I'm a great believer as well in partnerships.
Yeah.
Like you can't do everything on your own, but again, there are a lot of people in the agency business who do want to do things on their own. They do, and I'm talking to an ex-colleague who's just gone into an agency where long and short of it is they don't want to talk to other agents. They just want to do everything directly with the players, the clubs, and themselves.
Wow.
I've said, okay, fine. It's each to their own. If that's their model, my view is it's not a model that would work for us, and I don't think it's a model that is easy to maintain unless you already have a huge placement network.
Yeah.
So maybe you're a big franchise agency with 300, 400 players, and naturally you have that whole network, right? Because you'll have players in so many clubs. I don't think it's easy to do if you're anything less than that. So look, but each to their own.
Yeah.
For us, I think partnerships are key. And again, it's about making sure with any partnership that there's clear communication in terms of what each party brings to it. And also, we can be honest and transparent about any challenges that might occur, because the world of football is not smooth.
It's not.
There's always challenges. And it's just, again, it comes down to trust. It comes down to working with partners that are putting the work in. And it comes down to partners at the end of the day who also have the same sort of vision or a similar vision or set of values to what you have. And then finally, it's about identifying partners who can maybe unlock markets or give you a presence in markets that naturally you wouldn't be able to do yourself. So, I'd cite a market like, Eastern Europe. Like, naturally, we don't really have a presence on the ground with regards to Eastern Europe, but we have a number of partners that we are very, very close with and rely with, who do the scouting, who give the recommendations, and also in terms of managing players, will do some of that work. And then we then help to place and collaborate with the players and the partners subsequently.
Wow, that was great. That was strategic partnership. You have to be strategic. You did mention something about commercial deals.
Yeah.
And it's always different from the normal football contract.
Yeah.
A lot of agents, especially young agents, don't see that aspect of it, even to the extent that I know some players, they are signed different, their commercial deal is signed differently to a different agent. Their football contract is signed differently to a different agent. How should agents navigate assisting their players or their clients in that aspect, and how is it different from the normal contract, their commercial side and the playing contract? How should agent navigate that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that I would say again as an agent you really have to get your hands around, because increasingly now, particularly the growth of social media and the ability of athletes really to build their own brand and drive their own narratives, there is a huge opportunity commercially, and you have to work with people who know how to really build that opportunity and then help to commercialize the athlete's off-pitch career. So I think when you start off as an agent, normally you have a small roster of players, because that's the idea, right? You kind of build up your roster and you have the bandwidth to, I think, combine the playing aspect of the agency business with actually helping the player with their commercial opportunities. And I would say if you're a young agent new to the business and you're going into it early and you are working off that model, just having a handful of players, I'd encourage you to double hat that work so that you get a good understanding of the requirements on both sides. But once your roster of players gets reasonable, and I would say anything from 10 plus, I think you need to start looking at bringing in a resource into your agency that can really focus on the commercial aspect for your players, because it is impossible to do the player agency stuff and the commercial agency stuff well if you try and do it all yourself with a significant group of players. And anyone who says that, oh yeah, I'm doing a great job, I do that, I don't believe them. You're not doing a great job. You've probably got a very marketable player who's bringing in business just because of who they are. Maybe they've got big social media following, or they play for a big club. But I do not believe you're doing a good job if you're doing that all yourself. Yeah. So what I would say is that, you really need to look at someone who can help around the sort of brand strategy, brand development for players. And then you also really need a resource around partnerships. So developing brand relationships and really kind of joining those dots between, brands and athletes. So you have those brand partnerships. And even going on to the creative side where you can even start doing campaign development for brands and your athletes. So putting that into context of our business, we've launched our own commercial arm, Carly Comms, which really focuses on that. So within that, we've got the brand aspect, we've got the creative, we've got a filmmaker, award-winning filmmaker who does a lot of the content creation for us, and we're really developing that aspect. In the North American business, we've actually started a digital platform called Paddock Talent, where, the American commercial space is so vast. So what we were telling ourselves is, okay, there's existing brand relationships we have that clearly we want to kind of bring onto that platform, on board to the platform, and connect them with our talent as well as the wider talent that we have in our network. But there's so many brands out there, so how can we create a platform that maybe it can organically build and add to the brand relationship? So we have a platform called paddocktalent.com.
Yeah.
That's essentially an athlete brand platform. And on that, as brands, you can sign up to it and you have access to the SISU stable of talent. But in addition, we have talent from our network, from ice hockey. Leo, the managing director of the Americas business, he worked a lot with UFC fighters. So we have a lot of UFC fighters on there. And we've also recently kind of added the influencer space into there. So the commercial side is a business in its own right, but to be a full service agency, absolutely, you have to have the resource and the ability to deliver that for your players. Otherwise, you can't do both of those yourself. And that's the thing. I lean a lot into the playing side, and then obviously part of the business development and the business management around our commercial arm. But that is largely driven by other people who have more of the skill set and the expertise than me specifically.
Which is good because it will allow you to focus on the whole lot of things. Because I remember talking to you and I saw you went for a keynote speak in South Africa recently.
Yeah.
And on WhatsApp, you said you were traveling somewhere. It's not be nice to mention that one there. I was like, wow, you've just got back from Nigeria in February. For me, I've not even left Sheffield since I got back. Probably the farthest I've gone is Liverpool. And you've gone to South Africa, you're going to Asia again. And, it's like, wow, this is... If you think you are really working hard, and I'm seeing someone who's got that experience and all of those things working twice as hard as you think you are working hard, because even in Nigeria you're always on your laptop, so, wow, okay, I think I'm so yeah, how do you get that energy from, and how do you combine all of those things, having to do this, do that? How do you keep track of the important things you have to do as a football agent?
Yeah, that's another great question, and probably one that you're always learning so to speak, to get more efficient. But fundamentally, in terms of my energy, look, I think I've got that advantage. I think naturally I've got high energy levels. I don't think you can really survive in the football agency business if you haven't got fundamentally high energy levels. And as I've got older, I've I played sports, so I've always kept myself reasonably fit. And as you get older, you just learn to look after yourself a bit better. So maybe I didn't eat as well as I do now, but I am very focused on nutrition. I work out most mornings, so I'll wake up at kind of 6:30 in the morning. I normally use the first hour to work out. So, I've got my own home kind of set up, get myself set up, get a good healthy breakfast in. And I think that has really benefited me over the years, because as I get older, I don't feel like my energy levels are really kind of dipping down in the same way.
Yeah.
And then in terms of work, so look, to-do lists is a real bugbear of mine. Forget the to-do list, I would say. What you want to do is, because the problem with an agent and being an agent is that there's always something to do.
Yeah.
Right? And then you spend half your life trying to break up your to-do list into priorities, whatever. So what I do is I break my day up functionally. And what I mean by that is, so if we just say the generic day is 10 hours, that's usually what I give myself in terms of what I would say work hours in a day. I will allocate 2 hours of that day to what I call like calls, phone calls, meetings, set piece stuff. I will allocate another 2 hours to what I call business development. So where you're actively either making a new connection, so but whether that's LinkedIn, or maybe you may be kind of following up on some conference contacts you make, the classic business development 101. And then I allocate 2 hours to what I call deep work. And you can Google deep work, the concept of it. There's a few real practitioners of it. But essentially what that means is you turn your social media alerts off, you turn your phone off, you think, and you start doing the stuff that actually normally falls by the wayside because your hair's on fire and people are asking you to do this and that. So I normally block out 2 hours in a day where I've pretty much turned my phone off. Well, not pretty much. I do turn my phone off and do that thinking stuff, whether it's generating presentations, creating proposals, trying to do more of the creative stuff. And then I have that fourth 2 hours is the admin. So that is the crappy stuff, but the really essential stuff you have to do, fielding emails and all the other bits and pieces. So that leaves me, that's 8 hours pretty much scheduled in.
Straight walk.
And then I have that 2 hours like as overflow. Like, that I can fill in accordingly. If I'm being honest, those overflow 2 hours are normally just the admin stuff. Someone wants you to send a mandate out. You've got to, get that done. You've got to chase up the invoicing with the accounts, all of that sort of stuff. I break that day up functionally because then if you've got functional blocks in your day, what you will find is that naturally those sort of priorities fall out a lot better. And the second thing is you actually start achieving more things. So alluding to the deep work thing, it's very, very easy to end up not doing the creative stuff, pushing it back because you've got a deadline here, because someone's called you and you've got to do something. And if you think about that over the course of a year, that's so much you're missing out on in terms of driving your business and growing your business if you're not doing your deep work, if you're not doing the business development. So I found that what really made a difference to my business was developing that functional way of breaking up the day and getting rid of that to-do list, which I was just a slave to for so many years.
Wow, that's great. I think I'll take a cue from there. Now, looking at the to-do list or something maybe that's falling out of what you're supposed to do, especially in the way that football keeps changing. There are trends every day, even the rules of the game, the way the offside is not what it is yesterday and all of those things. So how do you keep up with those global trends of football and the constant changing rules of the game? For you to be on top of that, how do you do that?
Again, I mean, talking about going back to my functional kind of breakup of the day, normally speaking in that deep work bit, there's reading.
Oh.
Right. So again, if you've got 2 hours a day allocated to reading, I normally work Sunday through till Friday, because Saturday it's games and stuff. You're traveling around a lot. So, that's 12 hours a week where you can do some of the more creative stuff. You can do the reading and all the other bits and pieces. There's plenty of time to do that. And that's another reason why it's vitally important, because if you don't make that time, it is hard to stay on top of the trends and developments in the game.
Yeah. Looking at doing deals across nationals, across international deals, the rules in UK is different from that in probably Denmark, the rules in Germany, across how signing all of these contracts work. What was the best advice on how to do all of those things? How do you check that out? Because a lot of contract things we don't understand. How do you try to navigate that area?
Do your research. So look, if use Denmark as an example.
Yeah.
So if you're going to work in Denmark, you need to understand what the regulations are.
Yeah.
So normally the federation has a set of regulations that you need to understand in terms of contracts. So in Denmark, there's standard player contracts, like format. So have a look at them. And with the great thing about the modern world is that most translation tools are pretty good now. So even if it's in a foreign language, a document, put it into your Google Translate, the document spits it out in a language that's your native language.
Yeah.
The other thing then is to reach out to people in that market who would naturally do deals. So a lawyer. Look for law firms who are, involved in the Danish league, just to really kind of nail down the specifics. look for any material there is on the internet about, specific markets. Understand the market, and then if you're doing a specific transaction with a club as a foreign agent, there is a little bit of latitude that you will get as a foreign agent, so long as you fess up. So if I'm talking to a club and I'm saying, look, I've read the regulations and this is the standard playing contract, but can you just confirm this is the case? The club will give you the right answer. They want to sign the player. They want to get the deal done. So just do your confirmatory checks. But as I always say at the beginning, just do your research.
So now moving on to, because you've got a lot of background with African footballers and players. Do you think that's the new trend now? Because we see a lot of top clubs going to Africa, getting these players. And I see you always come to Nigeria supporting Evolution Cup 3 years now, picking those talents from there. Is it a new trend or what do you think? Why do you think the world of football is switching to Africa to scout talent?
Yeah, I don't think it's a new trend.
Okay.
I think it's an evolving trend. Because, look, when I started in 2013, there was a lot of clubs signing African players. Like Sweden, use an example, right? They've had a long history of signing players straight out of Africa. They like to send their scouts over there. They go and watch, attend a scouting tournament, whether it's Ghana, not so much Nigeria. They was quite scared of Nigeria back then, but they're starting to go to Nigeria now. And they'll pick players, like young players, because especially those sort of entry point markets into Europe, they understood well that they could actually really add value. If they brought in the right talent, polish that player up, they could sell them on for good money into some of the bigger leagues. I think what you've seen now is some of maybe the bigger leagues going more directly, because conversations even a couple of years ago I was having with English clubs was, I was saying to them, why don't you invest in academies in Africa, or work with an academy, so at least you can have some control around the talent development and help to develop those players who are ready for you. And I've had conversations where they'd be like, you know what, I'd rather that they went to Sweden and Denmark. We won't have that sort of risk, and we'd rather pay 10 million, 20 million transfer fee for the player who's already proved themselves in Sweden and Denmark than going into Africa and getting involved. And that seems to have moved on, even in 2 years, where now you're seeing English clubs actively looking in Africa, looking to make those partnerships with academies, looking to sign players directly out of the continent. I mean, for England specifically, there's a little bit of a reason, I think, behind that, because you've had this emergence of the ESC aspect, where essentially clubs can sign under 23 players from any league up to a Band 5 league, or who've been involved in a qualifying tournament. So that's kind of given them like 2 to 4 wild card kind of slots where they can sign a non-European player who's a special talent. I think that's partly driven some of the renewed interest from English clubs in African talent. But I think as well, it's just that whole competition for talent. Now you've got, the Middle East coming in. They're looking to sign young, talented African players.
Yeah.
You've got American clubs increasingly also looking to scout in that market. I feel like, gradually, even like markets like England and some of the bigger European markets who haven't maybe leaned in so much to African players, like Czech Republic's a good example. They've really gone in quite strong now into African players in the last 3-4 years. Same with like some of the Baltic states like Latvia, Riga, these clubs, they're all signing Africans left, right and centre.
Yeah.
So I think everyone's realised that it's a global talent market, and if they can get the right talent early enough, add a bit of value, they can really develop a very lucrative player trading model, and everyone's just getting involved now.
Maybe they will find the next Victor Osimhen. Yeah. To be honest, we are really short on time. I wish this can, keep going. I'm just going to ask this question about if there's one specific advice, probably, or lesson that you must have, if you add that information when it started back in, 12 years ago in 2013. What would that be, so that a lot of young agents, even established agents, can learn from that? What would that be?
One bit of advice. Have a plan and be consistent. I think that's worked for me.
Yeah.
I think of a lot of people that I started at the same time with who've fallen by the wayside. I think they were lacking one or other of those bits. Yeah. Have a plan, be consistent. It's not like a lottery ticket. You're not going to turn up in football and ka-ching, start earning lots of money unless you've got a great advantage. You know, your brother is, I don't know, a top player. Then clearly you can go in and ka-ching, right, if you're managing your brother. But have a plan, stick to it. It's not an easy business. It has its ups and downs. But if you're consistent, you're doing the right things, you have got some structure in terms of the way you're working, you will come out and you will develop a business. And whether it's a business that you want to stay in, or it's a business that is a beautiful thing and you want to grow it and keep and keep developing it, that's fine. You'll work that out when you get there. But absolutely, if you follow those steps, you will have something to show for it at the end of 5-10 years.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lindi. This brings us to the end of this brilliant podcast. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great. Thanks. Great speaking to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I hope to catch you up soon again.
Absolutely, I'm sure we will.
Yeah.
We'll catch you somewhere around the world, yeah? Trying to sign those 30-year-old players from there.